It was 5:42 a.m. when Daniel Park rolled his cleaning cart through the towering glass atrium of Atlantic Maritime Systems Virginia headquarters. The winter morning air hung thick with silence, pierced only by the soft echo of his footsteps on the polished marble. For over 2 decades, Daniel had worked as a janitor in this building, mopping the same hallways where engineers mapped the future of American naval technology. Daniel, now in his late 50s, moved with the practiced rhythm of someone who had accepted invisibility. His graying hair was tucked under a faded AMS cap, his uniform pressed with quiet dignity. No one noticed him anymore. They never really had. What they didn't know, or had long forgotten, was that Daniel Park had once stood among the brightest minds in this very company. 25 years ago, he was a senior propulsion engineer at AMS. He had designed a revolutionary engine prototype known as the HMX-9, intended to power the next generation of stealth naval destroyers. But a catastrophic failure during early trials had not only doomed the project but destroyed his career. A single notation error in the fuel distribution matrix had allegedly led to the engine's overheating and shutdown. Within weeks, Daniel was quietly reassigned to janitorial duties. No official firing. No hearing. Just erasure. That chapter of his life had been sealed, locked behind silence and shame. Only one person knew the full story, his daughter, Emily Park. Miles away in Cambridge, Emily stirred awake in her cramped MIT dorm room. Her desk was littered with engineering textbooks, fuel flow simulations, and scribbled equations. She'd fallen asleep again at her drafting board. Her final project for her mechanical engineering capstone was due in 2 weeks, a next-generation marine propulsion system that could improve fuel efficiency while meeting strict new emission standards. What Emily didn't yet realize was that the very engine design she was modifying, the AMX-24, was a direct descendant of the HMX-9 prototype her father had once created. The blueprint had evolved over decades, but the core configuration still bore the fingerprints of his genius. Emily often wondered why her father had never climbed the ranks. He was brilliant, after all. At home, he could deconstruct her fluid dynamics problems over breakfast and correct her torque vectors while slicing apples. When she was young, she believed he was just modest. As she grew older, the truth became a quiet ache neither of them addressed. Later that morning, Emily walked into the Advanced Propulsion Lab to submit her initial prototype draft. Professor Langston, her advisor, was already deep in conversation with 2 representatives from AMS. The company had recently partnered with MIT for early-stage R&D collaborations. Emily paused, her breath catching when she overheard one of them mention the HMX legacy line. "Excuse me," she said, stepping forward. "Did you say HMX?" The taller of the 2 men turned. "Yes, the HMX line. Our internal name for a propulsion series dating back to the early 2000s. Why?" Emily hesitated. "I've been working on a redesign of the AMX-24 for my thesis. I noticed structural irregularities in the fuel distribution pattern, especially under high-pressure simulations. It seems inefficient, almost like it was altered from an earlier configuration." Professor Langston raised an eyebrow. "That's an unusual observation for an undergraduate." The AMS rep exchanged glances with his colleague. "We're actually investigating issues with the AMX-24 in field deployment. Our destroyer prototype experienced unplanned thermal spikes during testing." Emily's heart pounded. Her instincts were right. "I may have a model that corrects for that. But I'd need to understand the original structure more completely." The man smiled politely. "We can't release classified historical designs, but if you're open to working with our internal R&D, we could use fresh eyes." That night, Emily called her father. "Dad, did you ever work on something called the HMX-9? There was silence on the line. Then a sigh. "Where did you hear that?" "I met some engineers from AMS today. They mentioned the HMX line. I think I'm working on a design that connects to it. Were you involved?" Daniel's voice softened. "Emily, that was a long time ago. It's nothing you need to worry about." She sat down, gripping the phone. "Dad, tell me the truth." For a long time, he said nothing. Then, in a voice that trembled more than she had ever heard before, he began. "I led the propulsion team that designed the HMX-9. We believed it would change maritime engineering forever. But before it ever launched, a failure during simulation shut it all down. The blame fell on me. A single line of code, supposedly mine, was flagged as the cause. I was demoted. Silenced. Emily's mind reeled. But, didn't you defend yourself? Daniel laughed bitterly. I tried. But back then, I was a Korean immigrant with poor English, no political capital, and no way to prove what I suspected, that someone had tampered with my blueprint. Emily's voice hardened. You think you were framed? I know I was. But it doesn't matter now. It matters to me, she said. She hung up with fire in her chest. The next morning, Emily requested access to the AMX-24's most recent test data. Using her own optimization model, she began reconstructing the engine's fuel dynamics. The numbers didn't lie. The thermal instability matched the exact conditions her father had described from his old design. It was like staring into the ghost of a crime scene. She pulled out the only artifact her father had ever shown her from his engineering days, a hand-drawn schematic he kept folded in an old book. As she laid it next to her simulation, she saw it. The error. Or rather, the edit. Someone had altered the original design, changing a critical injector angle by 4 degrees, a seemingly minor adjustment that would destabilize the entire engine under specific RPM conditions. Her hands shook. Daniel Park hadn't failed. He had been sabotaged. And now, 25 years later, the same flaw was back, still haunting the company that had buried him. Emily knew then that her thesis wasn't just a project. It was a reckoning. A way to rewrite the story of a man the world had forgotten. She would not let history silence him twice. 2 days later, Emily Park arrived at the Atlantic Maritime Systems headquarters in Virginia with her thesis proposal, an annotated simulation model, and a notebook filled with equations she'd barely slept compiling. The guard at the entrance gave her a strange look when she mentioned her appointment with AMS's R&D division. Few interns or students ever got through the front door without a badge or clearance. But Emily's request had been fast-tracked, thanks to Professor Langston's recommendation, and unbeknownst to her, thanks to the stir she'd caused among AMS's senior engineers. Inside the sprawling R&D facility, she was met by a man in his 60s with steel-gray hair and a reserved smile. You must be Emily Park, he said, offering a firm handshake. I'm Bill Henderson, lead propulsion engineer here. I worked on the HMX project, a long time ago. Emily's heart jumped. You knew about the original HMX-9? Knew it. He gave a dry chuckle. I built the combustion core alongside your father. The air in the room shifted. Emily blinked. You knew my dad? Knew him well. He was the most meticulous engineer I'd ever met. The kind of man who triple-checked every decimal and recalculated every angle until the numbers whispered back in harmony. Bill paused. He didn't deserve what happened. She sat down across from him, her voice quiet. Then why didn't you speak up? I tried, he said, leaning forward. But I was junior back then. And your father, he was already marked. You have to understand, Daniel came into AMS during a time when the company was run like a fortress. Old boys club. Politics ran deeper than truth. One mistake, or even a rumor of one, was all it took to bury a career. Emily swallowed hard. You think someone did it on purpose? I think it wasn't an accident, he said, choosing his words carefully. And I think it's happening again. He gestured to a file on the desk. This is the latest diagnostic report from the AMX-24 field trials. The propulsion systems aboard the USS Liberty, our test vessel, have suffered 4 unexpected shutdowns. Each one tied to irregular fuel flow under sustained RPM. Your model? It pointed us to the same angle deviation your father flagged 25 years ago. So you believe me, she said, a little breathless. I believe the data, he replied. And the data is screaming something's wrong. Emily opened her notebook and began walking him through the layers of her proposal, realigning the injector arc, rebalancing the combustion chamber temperature thresholds, and a new feedback algorithm to automatically adjust for pressure sure. FTS in real time. Bill watched her carefully, nodding. You've got his mind, he said finally. And his fire. They were interrupted by a sharp knock on the glass. A woman in a tailored blazer walked in without waiting for a response. Bill, she said. We need to talk. Now. Bill stood. Emily, this is Dr. Sandra Velasquez, our current head of propulsion systems. Sandra extended a hand with a polite but unreadable smile. We've heard impressive things about you. MIT, Langston's top student. Working on engine modeling that's caught the Navy's eye. Emily shook her hand. It's an honor to be here. Sandra's eyes narrowed slightly. I read your proposal. And while it's bold, it also steps on a lot of existing frameworks. Are you suggesting our current engine model is flawed? I'm suggesting that it contains a design oversight inherited from a prior version, Emily said carefully. An error that can cause thermal destabilization under certain conditions. Sandra nodded slowly. An error you believe originated, when exactly? From the HMX-9 lineage, Emily replied. Silence stretched across the room. Bill cleared his throat. Dr. Velasquez, we need to take this seriously. If she's right. I'll decide what we need to take seriously, Sandra cut in, turning to Emily. Let me be clear. What happened 25 years ago is irrelevant. Our focus is on the present. And while your initiative is appreciated, we can't allow unvetted student models to influence core military systems. Emily felt heat rising in her chest. Then give me a chance to prove it works. Run a controlled simulation. If I'm wrong, you lose nothing. But if I'm right. I said no, Sandra said sharply. And I expect you to refrain from making accusations about company legacy designs. That kind of language borders on defamatory. Emily's fists clenched under the table. I'm not trying to attack anyone. I just want the truth. Sandra offered a thin smile. Truth is a matter of protocol. And protocol says this conversation is over. She turned and walked out. Emily stared at the door long after it closed. Bill looked at her. She's tough. But don't let her shake you. Why does she care so much? Emily asked. It's just an engine design. No, Bill said. It's reputation. It's career. And maybe guilt. Emily looked at him sharply. I've seen enough cover-ups in my time to know the signs, Bill said. But we need evidence. Hard data. Not just theory. Emily nodded slowly. Then I'll get it. That night, Emily stayed late in the lab, running simulations. She fed the original HMX-9 design, her father's version, into the testbed and overlaid it with her adjusted model. The results were immediate. Fuel efficiency rose by 14%. Thermal stability improved by 22%. The failure points disappeared. She stared at the screen, a lump forming in her throat. He'd been right. All these years, her father had carried the weight of failure that wasn't his. She opened her phone and called him. Dad, she whispered. I saw it. I proved it. You were right. On the other end of the line, there was silence. Then a single, quiet exhale. I never needed to be right, Daniel said. I just needed someone to believe me. Emily wiped her eyes. Well, she said, now I'm going to make everyone believe you. She didn't know exactly how. But she knew where to start. She would request a meeting with Robert Whitmore, the CEO of AMS. And she would put everything on the line, not just her project, not just her future, but the truth her father had carried in silence for a quarter-century. Because engines fail. But some names should never have been buried. The executive floor at Atlantic Maritime Systems was a different world, gleaming steel, glass-walled offices, and an air of guarded importance. Emily had never been this high up in any building, let alone inside one of the most powerful defense contractors in the country. But now, after days of compiling simulation data, fuel pattern diagnostics, and legacy design comparisons, she was determined to face the man at the top. Robert Whitmore had agreed to give her 15 minutes. He didn't have to. As CEO, his time was rationed in minutes and measured in billions. But Professor Langston had called in a favor, and Bill Henderson's quiet influence hadn't hurt either. The receptionist led Emily into a long conference room lined with military models and oil paintings of old destroyers. She recognized the Liberty class in one of them, a ship currently sitting inactive at port, crippled by the very engine flaw she was trying to fix. Robert Whitmore entered precisely on time. Late 50s, tall, calm-eyed, with a presence that filled the room without noise. He extended his hand. Ms. Park. I've heard you've stirred up quite a conversation downstairs. Emily stood, firm but respectful. "Thank you for making time, Mr. Whitmore." He gestured for her to sit, then opened a folder, her thesis draft, with annotations in the margins. She recognized Sandra Velasquez's handwriting immediately. "I've reviewed your proposal," he said. "You've made some bold assertions." "They're not just assertions," she said. "They're backed by data. Data that contradicts 25 years of accepted engineering." "Yes. But I think we've accepted the wrong version of history." He watched her, assessing. "Go on." Emily took a breath. "The AMX-24 engine, which your company is deploying for naval use, has a critical flaw, an injector angle deviation that causes fuel instability under high RPMs. This deviation was introduced during a redesign of the HMX-9 prototype nearly 25 years ago." "And your source for that original design?" "My father, Daniel Park. He was the lead propulsion engineer on the HMX-9 project, until he was blamed for a failure that stemmed from this exact deviation." Whitmore's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. "I've read his personnel file," he said. "The records say the failure was traced back to his own calculations." "Then the records are wrong," Emily replied. "Or they were made to be." She opened her folder, pulling out printouts of simulation results. "When I reintroduce the original injector configuration, my father's version, the engine stabilizes. Fuel efficiency improves. The overheating stops. I've replicated these results across 3 different modeling environments." The deviation that led to the failure? It wasn't in his original design. It was added later. Whitmore was silent for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair. "You understand the implication of what you're saying?" "Yes. I'm saying that Daniel Park was scapegoated, and that AMS has been building engines based on a corrupted design for 2 decades. He looked out the window for a moment, then back at her. "This is no small accusation. Dr. Velasquez assures me the current model has passed all internal review protocols." "Then your protocols need an audit," Emily said. "Because if this engine goes into full-scale deployment and fails under stress, the consequences won't be just technical, they'll be national." She saw the flicker in his eyes. That argument had landed. He stood, walking toward the far wall. There, framed under glass, was a photo of the original HMX-9 team. Emily spotted her father, young, serious, in a blue-collared shirt, standing just to the right of a younger Bill Henderson. "I remember your father," Whitmore said. "Quiet. Brilliant. Not easy to read, but he cared about his work more than anyone else in that room. Then you should also remember that he disappeared from that room without a word." Whitmore nodded slowly. He was reassigned. There were pressures. "From who?" Emily asked. He turned, but didn't answer directly. "There are layers in any corporation," he said. "Politics. Competition. Fear of failure. Sometimes people make choices to protect the company. Or themselves." Emily stood, too. "You don't have to protect them anymore. But you can protect your company, by facing the truth now." He looked at her for a long time. "Give me your full test logs," he said finally. "And a copy of the original blueprint you referenced. I want our forensic team to verify your claims. I'll have them sent within the hour." "Good. And Ms. Park, if what you say is true, then you haven't just improved an engine. You've reopened a chapter this company left buried." As she turned to leave, he called after her. "One more thing. I'd like to meet your father." Emily paused at the door, stunned. Then she nodded. "He'll be here tomorrow." Outside the building, she called Daniel. "He wants to meet you," she said. There was a long pause on the other end. "I'm not sure I can walk into that place again," he said quietly. "You won't be walking in as a janitor this time," she said. "You'll walk in as the engineer you've always been." That night, Emily and Daniel sat at the kitchen table, side by side, just as they had so many nights before, only this time, the blueprints between them weren't dreams or memories. They were evidence. He pointed to a section of the combustion pathway. "This angle, see how it matches the original arc? Détessoir the déviation Bégin." "And here," she added, "is the revision log I found in the AMS database. Dated April 7, 1999. Edited by someone with the initials SV. Daniel looked up sharply.
Velasquez.
She was a junior systems analyst back then. Daniel rubbed his forehead. She was always in those meetings. Always asking questions. But I never imagined.
You think she altered the design?
I think she submitted the edit under someone else's approval. And no one questioned it. Then the failure happened, and they needed someone to blame. He closed his eyes. And they chose the immigrant with an accent and no allies. Emily reached across the table and took his hand.
Tomorrow, we get to tell your story.
All of it. He looked at her, tears forming in the corners of his eyes.
I'm not ready.
You are, she said.
And I'll be right there with you.
As the sun rose over Virginia, casting gold across the shipyards and silent cranes of AMS, a man who had once been erased prepared to return, not for revenge but for truth. And his daughter, armed with equations, courage and relentless love, was going to make sure he was heard. Daniel Park stood before the sliding glass doors of the Atlantic Maritime Systems headquarters, the morning sun reflecting off the building's mirrored facade. His hand trembled as it reached for the ID badge they'd mailed him the night before, not a janitorial access card this time, but a visitor pass marked Special Engineering Consultant. Emily stood beside him, dressed in a tailored blazer and carrying the portfolio that contained both her thesis and the forensic audit results they'd compiled. She noticed his hesitation and gently touched his arm. You don't have to prove anything today, Dad, she said.
Just tell the truth.
He gave a quiet nod and stepped through the doors. Inside, the receptionist greeted him with a smile. There was no recognition in her face. 25 years of scrubbing these floors, and now, no one remembered. Daniel didn't know if that hurt more or less than he expected. Emily led him to the elevator. On the ride up to the executive floor, Daniel remained silent, eyes fixed on the ascending numbers. Robert Whitmore met them at the entrance to the conference room, his demeanor more somber than formal this time. He extended his hand to Daniel. Mr. Park.
Thank you for coming.
Daniel hesitated, then shook it. Thank you for giving me this chance. Inside the room were several familiar faces: Bill Henderson, already seated and looking relieved, a few board members, reviewing documents with interest, and at the end of the table, Dr. Sandra Velasquez. She stood as they entered, her posture stiff, smile tight. I didn't realize Mr. Park would be attending, she said. He's central to this discussion, Whitmore replied calmly.
Please, let's begin.
Emily opened her portfolio and passed copies of the audit results down the table. Then she connected her laptop to the screen at the front of the room. This, she said, is the simulation data from the current AMX-24 propulsion system, as deployed on the USS Liberty. You'll see here, under sustained RPM above 4,800, the injector angle deviation leads to heat spikes, which trigger safety shutdowns.
She clicked again.
And this, she continued, is the original HMX-9 design, as archived unofficially by my father. His blueprint shows the injector angle at 36 degrees, whereas the AMX-24 design currently uses 40 degrees. She turned to Sandra. Dr. Velasquez, can you explain why the change was made? Sandra looked at the screen, then at the table. I don't recall that specific adjustment. Design parameters are refined constantly during testing. Emily didn't look away. According to AMS's internal logs, the edit was submitted under your account credentials on April 7, 1999. A murmur moved through the room.
Sandra's expression flickered.
That was over 2 decades ago. I was a junior systems analyst. I didn't have the authority to make structural changes. You did if someone gave you proxy access, Bill interjected. You worked under Chief Engineer Paul Renner, didn't you? Sandra's jaw tightened. Yes. But any changes I made would have been reviewed by him. Paul Renner retired shortly after the HMX-9 failure, Whitmore said, his voice quieter now. He refused an exit interview. Emily took a deep breath. We believe the injector angle was deliberately altered to create instability. And when the system failed during prototype trials, the blame was placed on my father, despite no record of his approval, and despite the original blueprint showing no such error. Daniel stood, his voice calm but resolute. I remember that trial.
I remember the room going, when the engines shut down.
I remember Paul's face when the error was found, like he already knew. And I remember Sandra Velasquez being the one who compiled the final design package.
Sandra's voice rose slightly. D'était sa sérieuse accusation.
It's not an accusation, Whitmore said, raising his hand. It's a question we now have the means, and the responsibility, to investigate. A board member at the far end of the table leaned forward. Why would someone sabotage the HMX-9 prototype? Bill answered this time. Internal competition.
Budget wars.
The HMX-9 project was threatening other legacy systems Paul Renner had helped develop. Discrediting it would redirect funding back toward older, more proven engines. And Daniel Park? The board member asked. He was an easy fall guy, Bill said.
Immigrant.
No political backing. A perfectionist who trusted the process too much. Sandra crossed her arms. You have no proof of intent. Emily held up the internal email metadata they'd recovered, an authorization chain linking Velasquez's account to the injector angle change, forwarded to Renner's private inbox minutes later. Whitmore looked down at the table. Then up again, more sharply. I'm placing a formal request for an internal review, he said. Sandra, until that review is complete, your access to propulsion systems is suspended. Her face went pale. You're suspending me over a decades-old design issue?
I'm suspending you because sommeon ir buriez the truth.
And that someone may have cost this company both integrity and lives. As Sandra left the room without another word, Emily felt her hands shaking. She wasn't sure if it was adrenaline or exhaustion. Probably both. Whitmore turned to Daniel. You deserved better. I can't change what happened, but I can make sure your name is cleared. Daniel nodded slowly. I didn't come back for revenge, he said. I came back because my daughter believed I should. He looked at Emily. And because maybe, somewhere deep down, I still believed in this place.
Whitmore stood.
I'd like to offer you both something. Daniel, a role as senior advisor in our propulsion legacy team. Help us clean up what should have never been buried.
And Emily, when you graduate, I want you on hors advanced développement uni. Full access. Full crédit. Emily blinked.
You don't need to decide now, he added. But know this, the engine your father dreamed of, it's not dead. It just needed the right hands to bring it back. As they left the building, Emily and Daniel stepped out into the bright winter light. You okay? She asked him. Daniel nodded, his voice steady. For the first time in 25 years. They walked toward the parking lot, side by side. No longer shadows in the margins. But names, etched again in blueprints, this time not in ink, but in truth. By the time Emily and Daniel got home that evening, the story had already started to spread. Someone inside AMS had leaked the meeting transcripts, perhaps a frustrated board member, perhaps a remorseful engineer, but whatever the motive, it was now public. The headline on DefenseWatch.com read, Former AMS engineer vindicated after 25-year scandal, design flaw blamed for cover-up. Within hours, other outlets picked it up. Naval Times, Aerotech Review, even national networks began referencing the incident, piecing together the timeline that Emily had spent months untangling. Daniel stared at the TV screen in stunned silence as the news anchor recited his name. For decades, Daniel Park worked quietly as a janitor at Atlantic Maritime Systems. Today, the company confirmed that a propulsion design he created in the 1990s was wrongly altered and then discredited, leading to a long-standing flaw in naval engines and his own professional exile. He reached for the remote, but Emily stopped him. You should hear this, she said softly. He sat back, breath shallow, eyes wet. I never thought my name would be on the news again, he murmured. You didn't just reclaim your name, Emily said. You exposed the truth. And you're going to help fix what they broke. But the fallout had only begun. The next day, AMS held a press conference. Robert Whitmore stood before a sea of reporters, cameras flashing, the company logo gleaming behind him. His expression was firm, unsmiling. I stand here today to acknowledge a failure, not of engineering alone, but of institutional responsibility. Mr. Daniel Park was not only wrongfully blamed for a critical failure in 1999, but stripped of his professional dignity and forced into silence. On behalf of AMS, I offer a public apology. We will be conducting a full internal audit and will cooperate fully with the Department of Defense to ensure all affected systems are reviewed and corrected. When a reporter asked about Sandra Velasquez, Whitmore confirmed her suspension and the start of a formal ethics investigation. But not everyone at AMS was celebrating the return of Daniel Park. Within engineering forums and internal message boards, a quiet debate had erupted. Some younger engineers hailed Emily and Daniel as heroes, symbols of integrity and second chances. Others, especially those who had built careers atop the AMX-24 architecture, felt threatened. "They're rewriting history," one anonymous comment read. "Throwing good people under the bus to glorify a failed project." Emily scrolled through the posts late that night, her jaw tightening. "Don't read those," Daniel said, stepping into the room. "They don't matter." "They do," she replied. "This isn't over, Dad. Not everyone wants the truth to win." The next morning, an email arrived in Emily's inbox. No subject line.
No sender.
Just a single attachment, a PDF titled Renner Archive, Confidential. She opened it cautiously. Inside were dozens of internal memos, engineering notes, and meeting summaries from the 1999 HMX-9 project. The documents revealed something Emily hadn't expected. Sandra Velasquez had raised concerns about the injector angle deviation. In one memo she wrote, "Preliminary models show deviation at 40 degrees may cause instability. Recommend further simulation before implementation." The note had been forwarded to Paul Renner. His reply, blunt and final. "Proceed as planned. We'll manage perception if necessary." Emily stared at the screen, stunned. "She didn't initiate the change," she whispered. "She warned against it." Daniel leaned over her shoulder, reading the memos. "Then why didn't she speak up?" "Maybe she tried," Emily said. "Maybe she got shut down and stayed quiet." For the first time, she felt something other than anger toward Sandra. Complicity, yes. But also fear. Self-preservation. Later that day, Emily brought the documents to Whitmore. "She wasn't the architect," she said. "Renner was. He overrode her objections." Whitmore read the memos with a heavy expression. "This doesn't excuse her silence. But it complicates the story." "What are you going to do?" Emily asked. "Keep going," he said. "Even when the truth gets messy." The following week, AMS invited Daniel and Emily to present their findings to the Navy's Joint Systems Command. The meeting was held in a secure facility outside Washington, attended by a roomful of officers, engineers, and analysts who had spent years trusting the AMX-24. Daniel was nervous. Emily could see it in the way he straightened his tie twice before they entered. She placed a hand on his arm. "You don't have to be perfect. Just honest." He gave her a faint smile. "Honest, I can do." Inside the room, Emily presented the simulation data again, but this time accompanied by real-world testing logs. Daniel followed with a technical breakdown of the design lineage, ending with a modest but powerful conclusion. "I made mistakes in my life," he said. "But not this one. And I've spent 25 years cleaning up after other people's mistakes. It's time I help clean up this one too." When he finished, there was silence. Then one officer spoke. "This is not the kind of story we usually hear in these halls. But it's one we should." By the end of the session, the Navy had agreed to suspend deployment of the AMX-24 until modifications based on Daniel and Emily's recommendations could be fully tested and validated. A new project was greenlit, Project Phoenix, to revise and rebuild the propulsion systems with the park's input at the helm. Outside, in the cool DC air, Daniel turned to his daughter. "I still don't know how all this happened," he said. "How we got here." "You didn't give up," Emily replied. "And neither did I." He looked at her, pride blooming behind years of humility. "You're more than my daughter, Emily. You're my legacy." She shook her head. "We're building a new legacy. One with your name on it. No more hiding." And in the quiet between them, a new kind of silence formed, not of shame or secrets but of peace. Project Phoenix began in a sunlit room on the 10th floor of AMS's Northern Virginia R&D campus. The room, with its curved glass walls and open architecture, symbolized a fresh start, a clean space for a project that had risen from decades of shadows. But clean slates didn't erase old fingerprints. Daniel Park entered the room on the first day, greeted by polite nods and sidelong glances. To some of the engineers, he was a hero, to others, an inconvenient resurrection. He could feel the tension hiding behind their carefully worded greetings. Emily stood at the whiteboard, already sketching out a new combustion pathway. "The new engine needs to do 3 things better," she said to the room. "Burn cleaner, run cooler, and scale modularly. We're not just patching the old design, we're redefining it." A young engineer named Malik, fresh out of MIT, raised his hand. "Are we basing this off the original HMX-9 or starting from scratch?" Daniel answered before Emily could. "We're starting from the truth. And the HMX-9, despite its buried history, holds more truth than anything AMS has built since." There was a pause. Malik nodded. Others scribbled notes. But one man in the corner, a senior systems analyst named Rick Morrison, leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "With respect," he said, "the HMX-9 failed field trials. That's not just history, it's data." Daniel met his gaze calmly. "It failed because someone sabotaged it. That's also data. You just have to know where to look." The meeting moved on, but the lines had been drawn. Emily could feel them forming: silent camps, old loyalties, unspoken resentments. Later that afternoon, as the team broke into design groups, Daniel lingered behind, studying the holographic model on the central console. It projected the AMX-24 side by side with the HMX-9 legacy structure. He touched the injector module with a stylus, rotating it slowly. "You still believe in it?" came a voice behind him. Daniel turned. It was Rick Morrison. "I believe in fixing what we broke," Daniel replied. Rick's expression was unreadable. "You know, when I joined AMS 20 years ago, people still whispered about your name. Some said you got framed. Others said you cracked under pressure." Daniel nodded. "And what did you believe?" "I didn't care. I only cared that your engine was off limits. No one would touch it. Management said it was cursed." Daniel looked back at the projection. It wasn't cursed. It was buried alive. Rick took a step closer. "Then here's your chance to prove it. But fair warning, some of the people who buried it still hold shovels." That night, Daniel sat alone in the project lounge, flipping through a physical copy of the HMX-9 technical binder. It was battered, the pages yellowed, his own handwritten notes in the margins. He remembered the long nights 25 years ago, believing he was building something that would outlive him. He didn't hear Sandra Velasquez approach until she was beside him. "I thought I might find you here," she said. Daniel didn't look up. "You're not supposed to have access to this floor." "They reinstated me this morning," she replied. "Pending completion of the ethics review." Daniel turned to her slowly, the binder still open in his hands. "You knew the injector angle was wrong." "I tried to flag it," she said. "Renner dismissed me. And I didn't fight him. That's on me." He closed the binder gently. "You let them ruin my life." "I was scared," Sandra said, her voice quieter now. "I thought if I stayed quiet, I'd survive. But I didn't. I just became a part of the machine." Daniel stood, facing her fully. "You want forgiveness?" "I want the truth to be whole," she said. "And I want to help."
No headlines.
No credit. Just the work. He studied her face, older now, but not unfamiliar. He saw something he hadn't seen before. Regret. And perhaps the shadow of the young engineer she'd once been, sitting beside him during those midnight brainstorming sessions. "You'll follow my lead," he said. Sandra nodded. "Yes." "Then pull up a chair. We start tomorrow at 0600. The next morning, the energy in the Phoenix lab shifted. With Sandra rejoining the team, skepticism rippled through the ranks, but Daniel didn't flinch. He assigned her to fuel efficiency calibration and gave Emily final design authority. They worked long hours, poring over engine flow models and stress simulations. Daniel and Emily barely spoke at home anymore, not out of tension, but out of total focus. Meals were taken between render queues. Sleep came in 3-hour shifts. 3 weeks in, they ran the first live test of the new Phoenix 1 prototype. The lab was silent as the engine core spun up. Readouts flickered across multiple screens. Temperatures stabilized.
Emissions dropped.
Fuel efficiency improved by 17%. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was real. When the engine powered down, the room burst into quiet applause. Emily turned to her father, beaming. He simply nodded, a small smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. But celebration didn't last long. A few days later, Whitmore called Daniel into his office. "You're making progress," he said. "But you need to be careful." Daniel frowned. "Careful of what?" "Politics. Rick Morrison has been briefing the board separately. He's not sold on Phoenix. Says we're overcorrecting. That you're chasing ghosts." Daniel sighed. "Isn't that why you brought me back? To face them?" Whitmore looked tired. "I brought you back because I believe in you. But there are people here who'd rather cling to mistakes than admit they were wrong. You threaten that comfort." Daniel stood, shoulders square. "Then let me threaten it." As he left the office, he passed Rick in the hall. The two men locked eyes. No words were exchanged. But the tension was there, cold, coiled, inevitable. Back in the lab, Emily noticed the shift in her father's energy. The quiet focus was still there, but something darker moved beneath it now. She waited until the others had left for the day, then approached him. "Dad," she said, "you're not just fighting for the engine anymore, are you?" He looked up, surprised by her directness. "No," he admitted. "I'm fighting for what they stole. And sometimes, I wonder if I want justice, or revenge." Emily placed her hand over his on the table. "Don't let them decide who you become." He met her eyes. "They already did once. I won't let it happen again." And with that, he turned back to the design console. The battle was no longer just technical. It was personal. By the end of the 4th week, Phoenix was no longer just a project, it was a battleground. What began as an engineering initiative to correct a decades-old wrong had become a storm of competing interests. Reports of Daniel's reinstatement and the internal audit had reached Capitol Hill. Lawmakers, always sensitive to military contracts and public perception, began to take notice. Senator Carolyn Mitchell, chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, announced an oversight review of AMS's defense contracts. On cable news, pundits debated whether the Phoenix project was a redemption story or a political liability. Meanwhile, inside the AMS campus, alliances fractured further. Rick Morrison, the senior analyst who had clashed with Daniel from the start, began holding private meetings with board members. He pushed a counter-narrative, that Phoenix, while idealistic, was a distraction from practical timelines and deliverables. "We're bleeding resources," he told them, "and staking our reputation on a legacy design created before smartphones existed." Whitmore tried to mediate, but the tide was shifting. Too many at AMS were uncomfortable with what Phoenix represented, not just a technical overhaul, but a reckoning. One afternoon, as Emily walked into the lab, she found the main design terminal locked. A message blinked across the screen: "Access temporarily suspended, security review." She rushed to Whitmore's office. "They're freezing our files," she said. "On what grounds?" Whitmore looked up, weariness etched into every line of his face. "The board has called for an immediate pause," he said. "They want a third-party assessment of the Phoenix data. Claims have been made about potential IP conflicts, unclear authorship of certain modules, and procedural deviations." Emily's eyes narrowed. "It's Rick. He's using red tape to kill momentum." "Perhaps," Whitmore replied. "Or perhaps the board is simply afraid of where this is going." She crossed her arms. "We gave them results. A working prototype. Data that proves the concept." "Sometimes truth isn't enough," he said quietly. "Especially when it threatens too many careers." Meanwhile, Daniel sat in the engineering lounge, flipping through a dossier someone had anonymously left on his desk. It contained internal memos between Rick Morrison and outside consultants, emails in which Rick expressed intent to neutralize Phoenix's influence before the upcoming shareholder meeting. He closed the folder slowly. Sandra, sitting across from him, noticed the tension in his grip. "What is it?" she asked. "They're not just pausing us," he said. "They're preparing to bury us again." He passed her the dossier. Her face grew pale as she read. "If this gets out," she began. "Then Phoenix dies in the court of public opinion before it ever gets field tested," Daniel finished. Emily joined them moments later, visibly shaken. "We need to fight back," she said. "We go to the press. We show them the results, the timeline, everything." Daniel looked at her, conflicted. "And kill any chance this engine ever sees real deployment?" he asked. "You know how the media works. Once this becomes scandal fodder, no admiral will want their name tied to it." "So what's the alternative?" Emily asked. "Let them strangle it quietly?" Daniel stood and walked to the window, watching the winter sunlight dance across the AMS courtyard. "For 25 years, I stayed quiet. It cost me everything. But staying silent now might cost more than just me." He turned to Sandra. "You still know people in the Office of Naval Engineering?" She nodded slowly. "Some. Why?" "I want to present Phoenix directly to them."
No PR.
"No politics. Just the engine and the math." Emily's eyes widened. "That's risky. You'll bypass AMS protocol." "They've already frozen us out," Daniel said. "What else are they going to do, fire me?" Later that week, under the guise of a routine performance demo, Daniel and Emily met with Rear Admiral Nolan Briggs at a secure Navy testing site. Sandra accompanied them, acting as technical liaison. The demonstration was stripped down, no theatrics, just Phoenix, one spinning in a containment rig, hooked to performance monitors. As the engine roared to life, Briggs watched the data unfold in real time. Fuel efficiency, thermal stability, emission reductions. Each metric exceeded current operational standards by margins no one in the Navy had seen before. When it powered down, Briggs stood in silence for several long seconds. "Who else has seen these numbers?" he asked. "AMS board," Daniel replied. "Some want to shelve it. Too much baggage." Briggs raised an eyebrow. "And you're showing this to me, off the books?" "I'm showing it to someone who understands what it means," Daniel said. Briggs nodded. "Leave the full report with me. I can't make promises, but I'll make noise." The next morning the story leaked, not from Emily, not from Daniel, but from someone within the Navy. A classified report summarizing Phoenix's performance hit the inboxes of several defense journalists. Within hours, headlines read, "Buried engine design outperforms current fleet standards. AMS whistleblower sparks new inquiry." AMS went into panic mode. The board called an emergency meeting. Whitmore was summoned for questioning. Rick Morrison issued a carefully worded internal statement disavowing all unsanctioned demonstrations. And Daniel Park? He walked into the lab that day to find a red security notice taped to the terminal again, this time with his name on it. Effective immediately, Daniel Park's access is suspended pending investigation into breach of protocol. Emily met him outside, holding back tears. "They're locking us out." Daniel didn't flinch. "Let them," he said. "The engine is alive now. And the world knows it." Sandra emerged from the building moments later. "I just got a message from Admiral Briggs," she said. "The Department of Defense wants a full audit of AMS's propulsion programs. Starting with Phoenix." Daniel exhaled slowly. "They wanted to kill it. But in trying to silence us, they gave it a louder voice." Emily looked at her father with fierce pride. "What do we do now?" Daniel smiled. "Now we build the next one." The Department of Defense launched its formal audit within 72 hours of the Phoenix data leak. A task force of auditors, naval engineers, and legal investigators set up shop inside AMS's Virginia campus, requesting access to 20 years of design logs, correspondence, and procurement records. The once intimidating executive floor fell silent under the weight of scrutiny. The board, which had comfortably insulated itself from consequence for decades, now found itself under a microscope. Rick Morrison was the first to be called into closed-door questioning. The contents of his private memos and unofficial advisory role on propulsion systems were laid bare. He denied any wrongdoing, of course, but the weight of evidence was gathering like a storm front. Meanwhile, Phoenix, still technically suspended, became the most talked-about technology on every defense forum. Anonymous insiders confirmed that initial military evaluations were exceptional, even paradigm-shifting. For Emily, it was surreal. 3 months ago, she said to Daniel over dinner, we were working on this in our garage. Now, It's on the desk of every defense analyst in DC. Daniel, ever cautious, nodded. And every lobbyist. At AMS, the pressure became unbearable. With the audit underway and media attention mounting, several executives offered to resign. Whitmore, who had once been their shield, now became their scapegoat. I've been asked to take a leave of absence, he told Daniel during a brief meeting in the company garden. They want someone to blame, and I'm the nearest clean target. You're not clean, Robert, Daniel said bluntly. But you're honest. That's rare enough. Whitmore nodded, hands folded. Phoenix is your project now. If the company survives this storm, it will be because of you and your daughter. Back in the lab, Emily worked day and night with the skeleton team that remained loyal to the mission. Sandra Velasquez, now fully reinstated, took over compliance mapping. Malik, the young MIT graduate, led integration testing. But whispers of deals being made in the shadows reached their ears. DoD might push AMS to license Phoenix to other contractors, Sandra said. Privatize the rollout. Strip us out of it. Emily's face tightened. They'll take our work and bury our names. Daniel said nothing. That evening, as he walked alone to the train station, a black SUV pulled up beside him. The window rolled down, revealing a sharply dressed man with government credentials pinned to his lapel. Mr. Park, he said, do you have a moment? Daniel hesitated. That depends. My name is Victor Lane. Office of Defense Technology Acquisition. We're overseeing the post-audit resolution strategy for AMS. Sounds like a cleanup job. Something like that, Lane smiled. May I offer you a ride? Inside the car, Lane handed Daniel a secure tablet. Here's the offer. We want to fast-track Phoenix, but AMS is too politically volatile. So we'd like to buy the design outright. Transfer it to a neutral contractor. Full credit will be preserved in official documentation. Daniel scrolled through the contract. It was lucrative, $10 million, personal indemnity, a consulting position, and non-disclosure clauses buried in the fine print. You want to buy the truth, Daniel said flatly. We want to deploy it safely, Lane replied. Without dragging your daughter or your name through any more congressional hearings. Daniel set the tablet down. This design saved my dignity. It saved my daughter's future. And it could save lives. Then why gamble it in the public arena? Lane asked. Sign the papers. Walk away a hero. Let the machine do what it does. Daniel opened the car door. I spent 25 years inside that machine, he said. Not again. The next day, Lane's offer found its way to Emily's desk. He came to me too, she said, storming into Daniel's office. They're trying to split us. Offer you a legacy, and me a lifetime of silence. He offered you money? Daniel asked. No, she said. He offered me a promotion. Head of research at a defense startup in Colorado. With a bonus. They want me to abandon Phoenix. Quietly. Daniel sat in silence. He's testing us, she continued. Seeing which one of us will blink. You think I'm tempted, Daniel said. I know I am, Emily replied, voice low.
I'm tired, Dad.
I'm tired of fighting. Daniel stood, walking slowly to the lab's central model of Phoenix. He placed his hand on the holographic projection, feeling nothing but memory beneath his palm. I almost signed it, he admitted. For a second. Just for a second. Emily stared at him. So why didn't you? He turned to her. Because truth without struggle is just convenience. Later that week, Rick Morrison was formally suspended pending legal review. Emails confirmed his efforts to suppress Phoenix, as well as undisclosed financial ties to Rentec Dynamics, a competitor with deep roots in AMS's previous engine contracts. When the news broke, AMS's stock tumbled. But something else happened too. Employees, hundreds of them, began sending private messages to Emily and Daniel. Messages of support. Apologies. Stories of what they had witnessed but had been too afraid to report. One engineer wrote, I was in the room when they altered your injector specs. I said nothing. But I never forgot. Thank you for not letting it die. Emily read each one aloud to her father. You started a revolution, she said.
No, Daniel corrected. We ended an illusion.
At the final project review with the Navy, Admiral Briggs stood before a room of analysts, engineers, and legal advisors. On a large screen behind him was a single slide, Phoenix V.3.4, the culmination of 30 years of truth, failure, rediscovery, and redemption.
Deploying Phoenix isn't just a technical decision, Briggs said. It's a moral one. This engine doesn't just represent efficiency. It represents what happens when courage outlasts compromise. He turned to Daniel and Emily. And this father and daughter taught us that. Outside, as winter thawed into spring, Daniel and Emily stood together in the courtyard. Do you think we won? She asked. Daniel looked at her, eyes calm. We endured. That's something more. She smiled. I still have your old blueprints, she said. The ones you drew by hand. He laughed softly. Then maybe it's time we draw something new. The Pentagon greenlit Project Phoenix in a late April press conference. Rear Admiral Briggs stood at the podium, flanked by representatives from the Navy and Department of Defense. Behind him, on a massive LED screen, spun a holographic model of the Phoenix propulsion system. This technology, he declared, represents not just a leap in engineering, but a course correction in the values we defend: transparency, innovation, and integrity. It was the kind of moment engineers dream of. Cameras clicked. Reporters jotted notes. Pundits praised the Defense Department for listening to the truth. But back in Virginia, Daniel and Emily Park didn't attend the press conference. They were in the lab, watching the announcement unfold on a small monitor, surrounded by empty coffee mugs, scattered schematics, and exhaustion. Just like that, Emily whispered, they make it official. Daniel nodded, arms crossed. And they don't even mention your name, she added, quieter now. He didn't answer. Not out of bitterness, but understanding. He had never done it for credit. 2 days later, invitations began to arrive. A profile feature from The Atlantic. A speaking engagement at MIT. A book deal from a major publisher. And a letter from the White House, inviting Daniel to receive the National Medal of Technology and Innovation. He handed it to Emily. You should accept it, she said. It's for both of us, he replied. But she shook her head.
No.
You kept this alive. You carried it through silence. Through shame. He smiled, but his eyes carried weight. That shame never fully goes away, he said. It just changes shape. At AMS, the board scrambled to restructure. Several executives resigned. Others offered public apologies. The company rebranded its R&D division as Orion Systems, placing Emily as its new chief technical advisor. She was the youngest woman ever to hold that title in the company's history. Rick Morrison faced formal charges, not only for ethics violations but also for obstruction of a federal audit. His lawyer released a carefully crafted statement denying intentional wrongdoing. In a conference room filled with reporters, Daniel addressed the aftermath for the first time. There were no villains in lab coats, he said. Just systems that rewarded silence more than honesty. People made bad choices. So did I. But the future isn't built by blame. It's built by people who choose truth, even when it costs them. The room went quiet. It wasn't a soundbite. It was a reckoning. Outside the company walls, the Phoenix system began testing in real-world naval applications. Early reports from the fleet confirmed what the prototypes had promised: massive fuel savings, decreased maintenance needs, and reduced emissions. International defense partners expressed interest. Licensing negotiations began. But not all consequences were technical. For Emily, the spotlight brought scrutiny. Old colleagues resurfaced, some claiming partial credit. Journalists dug into her academic record, her family history, even her social media posts from college. She handled it with grace, but privately it wore her down. I feel like I'm becoming a brand, she told her father. Not a person. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. That's why you need to stay grounded in the work. Let them talk. Let them speculate. Just don't let them rewrite who you are. Weeks later, during a panel discussion at Stanford, a student asked Emily a pointed question. If Phoenix was buried for 2 decades, and AMS let that happen, why didn't you just walk away and build it somewhere else? She paused. Because sometimes,
Changing a system is harder than abandoning it, she said. And harder is usually more meaningful. The audience applauded. But later, backstage, a Department of Defense official approached her. You've become something of a symbol, he said. Not just for engineers. For reformers. That has weight. I didn't ask for that, she replied. No one ever does. Meanwhile, Daniel faced his own ghosts. He received a message from David Renner, the former AMS executive who had orchestrated his fall. Now retired, living quietly in Oregon. It was a simple email. You were right. I was wrong. If there's ever a day I can say it in person, I will. Daniel didn't respond. He printed the email, folded it, and placed it in the back of his original HMX-9 binder. Some things didn't need answers. Just acknowledgements. The awards kept coming. The media labeled Phoenix, the engine that couldn't be killed. Daniel declined several honors. He only accepted one, on the condition that Emily would present it with him. At the National Medal of Technology ceremony, held in a minimalist glass hole in Washington, D.C., the presenter read from the citation. For their joint contribution to modern propulsion science, their unwavering pursuit of engineering integrity, and their courage in the face of institutional failure. Emily handed her father the medal. He looked out at the room, senators, scientists, CEOs, and said just 5 words. This is for the silenced.
No aplausos.
Just quiet respect. That night, back in Virginia, father and daughter sat outside under the stars. The lab was quiet. The courtyard still. Their lives, once ruled by vengeance and vindication, now hummed with something softer. You know, Emily said, when I was a kid, I used to think you were boring. Daniel laughed. Most kids do. I thought being quiet meant being weak. He turned to her. And now? She smiled. Now I know that silence can be heavy. But speaking up, when it matters, that takes strength. Daniel looked up at the stars. Maybe next time, someone else won't wait 25 years. She nodded. Maybe we made that possible. In the distance, lights from the testing hangar flickered as the newest version of Phoenix went online. It was no longer just an engine. It was a legacy. 1 year had passed. Phoenix was now operational in 4 active Navy vessels. Performance metrics exceeded projections. Several NATO allies were in licensing negotiations. In engineering schools across the country, case studies on the project were taught under the banner, Innovation Against Resistance. And in a modest office on the edge of the AMS campus, Daniel Park sat at a wide wooden desk, reviewing a young engineer's prototype. The door creaked open. You're doing it again, Emily said, leaning on the frame. Doing what? He asked without looking up. Giving away your time for free. Daniel smiled, still reading. He has potential, he said. Reminds me of Malik. Or you. Emily stepped in and placed a folder on the desk. These are the internship applicants for the summer program. We've got students from MIT Berkeley, even one from Seoul National University. He picked it up. Already. Legacy waits for no one, she said. The walls of the office were different now. Gone were the hollow plaques and generic awards. Instead, photos lined the shelves, black and white blueprints, snapshots of Phoenix testing, candid moments in the lab. At the center, framed, was a handwritten note. Truth delayed is still truth. But justice delayed must be claimed. Dippy. Outside, the Orion Systems building, once AMS's forgotten wing, now bore a new name, the Park Center for Engineering Integrity. It wasn't a monument. It was a challenge. Are you sure about the name? Emily had asked when the board proposed it. I'm sure about the integrity part, Daniel had said. They can keep the name. But they'd better earn the rest. The dedication ceremony had been modest.
No ribbon cutting.
No national anthem. Just a small gathering of engineers, students, and staff. Whitmore, retired and free from corporate politics, gave a short speech. This isn't about fixing the past, he had said. It's about refusing to repeat it. Daniel remembered looking out over the audience and realizing something unexpected. He wasn't angry anymore. And that absence of anger, so long fused with purpose, felt like a kind of peace. That evening, back in the lab, Emily pulled up the early designs of Phoenix 5. "This version will be completely modular," she said. "Adaptable for civilian shipping, maybe even green energy platforms." Daniel looked at the simulation model. "You're already thinking beyond war," he said. She nodded. "You taught me that the best designs outlast their origin." Then she looked at him carefully. "And that the best engineers know when to let go." Daniel knew what she meant. He had started Phoenix as a restoration of truth, a personal mission to rewrite his own ending. But now, that story belonged to others. "You'll keep it safe?" he asked. She placed her hand over the projection. "No," she said. "I'll keep it moving." In the months that followed, Emily became a fixture at international conferences. Not a celebrity, but a voice. Her talks weren't about the engine specs or the performance charts. They were about ethics, mentorship, and the cost of innovation. At a global engineering summit in Berlin, she ended a keynote with a single slide, no text, just an old photograph of her and Daniel working in their garage, surrounded by wires and coffee mugs. The audience gave a standing ovation. Afterward, a young woman from Nigeria approached her. "My father was an engineer," she said. "He died before he could finish his final project. He was always silenced. Watching you, I feel like he's been heard." Emily didn't respond with words. She simply nodded, the way Daniel once had when words were too small for truth. Back in Virginia, Daniel settled into quieter rhythms. He taught occasionally, wrote op-eds when the topic required clarity. But mostly he listened, to students, to the next generation, to the echo of what had been built. One rainy afternoon, he visited the AMS archives. The clerk recognized him instantly. "We've set aside the HMX files you requested," she said. "We also found your original employment file. Would you like to see it?" He hesitated, then nodded. She handed him a slim folder, yellowed by time. Inside were his evaluations, reprimands, and finally, the demotion letter. At the bottom of the page, a note in familiar handwriting. "Sometimes, the long way is the only honest way home. Ervu." Whitmore had written it. Daniel closed the folder gently. Outside, the rain fell steadily. Not a storm, not a flood. Just the kind of rain that asked the world to be still for a moment. He stepped out under the awning and watched the drops hit the pavement. Then he walked slowly, toward the edge of campus, where a new cohort of interns was arriving, eager, uncertain, and unaware that the corridor they walked had once been a place of silence. Emily stood waiting for him beneath a tree. "They're nervous," she said. "So were we," he replied. "They asked if you'd speak today." Daniel looked over at the group. They were laughing, checking their phones, nudging each other in quiet anticipation. "What would I even say?" "That justice is slow, but worth it. That ideas matter. That systems can change." He nodded. Then they walked together toward the group, father and daughter, the shadow of the past behind them, the hum of invention ahead. And somewhere deep in the heart of a Navy vessel miles offshore, the Phoenix engine ran quietly, powerfully, exactly as it was meant to. It didn't need applause. It only needed to be true.